Hey guys, welcome to Behind the Build. In this episode of Behind the Build, we'll be talking about how to approach doing a collaborative mock with a friend or group of friends. And I'll show you it's not as difficult as you may think. But before we start, let's talk about what exactly a collaborative build is. Well, a collaborative build, or collab for short, is when you or one of your friends come together to make a larger, more impressive mock, or display of mocks. Often this is done for conventions, but it's also of course possible to do so just for fun. In this episode, I'll be talking about tips for multiple different types of collabs, including making a collab with one or more friends on the same mock, making a collaborative build with an online friend that you just plan on posting online, making a collaborative group build where everyone builds different things under a unified theme, and finally making a collab with a group of people in a local LUG. The tips and advice I'll discuss in this episode will be helpful no matter what style of collab you're doing. It's easy to apply what I'll say today to any style of building. So let's start things off as I share my experience with collabing and what I've learnt from that. Every year for the last 7 years, I've displayed my mocks at Brickvention, Australia. Every year I collaborate with a friend of mine called Eli. We both build one half of a larger scale castle diorama. I live in Perth, and he lives in New South Wales. We're pretty much on opposite sides of Australia. And then on top of that, we both pack up our mocks and fly them over to Melbourne for the convention, where we join up both of our sides together just for the convention. So there's a lot of planning and a lot of discussion that goes into what we do. It's by far no easy feat to get the two of our mocks to match up perfectly. But over the last 7 years, we've certainly managed to refine an effective process that has worked every time, and I want to share that with you guys now. So let's get started. First off, put a lot of thought into who you want to collaborate with. Sure, it's so much fun to collaborate with friends. Working together on the same mock can be so much fun. But if you're working with someone who will diminish your work, be overly controlling, or will just decide to scrap everything that you've done because it's awful and they'll just rebuild it themselves on the convention day, well then what's the point? Remember, you have to work as a team. This is a collaborative build after all. No one person builds better than the other, and no one person gets all the glory. You did this as a team. So you got to support each other. And the best way to support each other is to play off each other's strengths. If someone has access to more pieces or has a little bit more time to work on their side, then make sure that they're building the larger parts of the mock. Maybe one of you builds fantastic trees, but the other person just isn't as good. Or maybe give that job to the true tree master. Being a good team player means checking in constantly with how your collaborative partner is going. Do they need some help with anything? How's their build going? Can you support them in any way? Being a good team member also means setting boundaries. You straight up can't suddenly pull out of the collab midway. Say I did that with my friend Eli. He'd be flying all the way to Melbourne just to set up half of an unfinished mock, and I'd basically be the cause of him more or less wasting 2 or 3 months of build time and a heck of a lot of money. That's just not fair. So if you do commit to a collaborative build with someone, first check if both of you can 100% commit to this or not. Pulling out is just disrespectful and can be a massive issue for both people involved. It's important to establish some goals or ground rules before you start. What boundaries or expectations and plans do you have? So some examples of these could be, we have to finish the mock by this specific date so that we're ready for the convention. Everybody's got to reply to group messages within 24 hours of them being posted. If we're meeting up to work on the mock, every team member must be there on time, whether that's a Skype call or in person. We'll be using this specific color palette for the mock. The dimensions of the mock will be, etc., etc. I mentioned group messages before. Eli and myself simply text each other questions, images, and updates. It's a simple and effective way for both of us to stay in contact and make sure that we're on the same page. And this way, if problems arise, it's a really easy way to help sort out that sort of stuff. We're basically in constant communication throughout the entire building process, and honestly, that makes things so much easier, so I highly recommend that you do the same. It's also very important to ensure that you're both on the same page with the overall vision that you have for what it is that you're building. Eli and myself begin each project by first deciding on a particular concept. For our Brickvention 2019 build, we decided on the concept of a demon attacking a city that also has an underground sewer system beneath it. Once we came up with this idea, we started collecting reference images. Often we take inspiration from Skyrim or Lord of the Rings, or we just simply Google some images and see what comes up. We find some images that match what we were both thinking, send them to each other, and take specific notes on any important things, or things that we want to more specifically highlight. For example, the look of the demon in this image, and also the specific details and atmosphere of this sewer system were important in conveying our visions to each other. So once we both have a clear and more concrete idea of how we're both envisioning our mock to look, we draw up an image of how we envision the mock to look. This is mainly an image to convey the overall layout and composition of the build itself. This will of course have multiple different iterations over time, and that's totally okay. Then pretty much at this point, we can both agree that we completely have a strong and unified idea of our vision for the mock. And sometimes other stimuluses will come up as well, and that'll help us be even further on the same page. Maybe we reference a specific scene from a movie, or a certain song has the same kind of atmosphere that we're aiming for the mock. And so we make sure to reference that too. Then after that, we're ready to go, and we start. So everyone in your collaborative process, they've got to be on the same page. That way you can both collectively work towards the same goal and the same design. If multiple people have different ideas on what exactly the mock is going to look like, it's not going to turn out so hot. You're more or less going to get two completely different builds, and that's not necessarily what you want. Maybe one person thinks that this is a dark and gritty mock, but the other person thinks this is a lot more light-hearted and brighter and beautiful. And so that's just going to create a jarring mock. So you got to make sure you're on the same page. Make sure you have the same vision. Feel free to use this process that I just shared above with your own collaborative builds, but if something else works better for you, by all means, use that instead. Sometimes you reach a point where one of you wants one thing, but the other person wants something else. Well, just like any relationship, you have to compromise. For example, when collaborating with Eli, we always use flesh minifigure heads. It gives a more realistic look to the minifigures, and we personally just prefer it. But one year, I wanted to use yellow minifigure heads because I simply had way more of them. But Eli was pretty dead set on staying with those flesh minifigures, and he just wouldn't budge. So I found a way to make a compromise. I was okay to let go of the idea of using yellow minifigure heads, if he was okay with letting me build the dragon on the mock that we were making that year. He was happy to do so, and the debate was over. I think it's always important to be able to let things go when you're collaborating. Sometimes your teammate may not see things the same way that you do, and honestly, that's okay. There comes a point where you just have to let go and surrender to a mutual decision, or find a way to change the concept until both of you are happy. Sure, our minifigure debate was a very kind of cosmetic debate and fairly unimportant in the overall design of the mock, but the same thing can be applied to larger scale debates or problems. It's the same principles, just a different solution. Find a compromise. One thing that can be one of the biggest issues with collabs is infighting or people just not meeting expectations. I've heard stories where people finish a collab with a group of people and they want to rip each other's throats out. So in order to make sure that you're not one of those people causing others to rip out their hair and want to kill each other, always ask yourself, am I good to work with? Well, how do you know if you're good to work with? Ask yourself the following questions. Is your focus purely on the mock itself and any kind of drama is totally outside of your focus right now? Are you actually meeting the goals and expectations you've laid out with your team? Are you being respectful of your team members? Are you treating them like actual human beings? Are you taking on the advice of others? If you answered no to any of these, chances are you're being difficult to work with and making this collab a real pain for everyone involved. And if you answer these questions and you're still not quite sure, straight up ask your team, am I good to work with right now? Have an open and honest communication with your team. Again, this is a team sport, so just be respectful of your friends and fix any kind of problems that you're doing.
If you wanna make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make a change.
Also, it's important to surrender control when you build. You straight up cannot make art when control is in the room. Let go of it. The most you can do is offer your opinion and suggest changes. And bear in mind, it's not always a given that people will listen to your suggestions. And those suggestions may not even be the best direction for your mock as well. There's never a right answer with art, and often art is born out of spontaneity and synchronicity, and that's something that is straight up impossible to occur when you're in a controlling mindset. So trust that sometimes things may be going an odd direction, and all hope may seem lost, but it will sort itself out in the end. Sometimes you just have to let it go and trust that the mock will end up where it needs to end up.
The key to a happy life is to accept you are never actually in control.
Now, what if you absolutely hate what the other person has done? Well, there are nice ways of telling them that you have some changes in mind. Straight up insulting someone's work is just rude and likely won't actually help them at all. And like we said before, if you're being rude, you're being terrible to work with. And ultimately, we just want to have fun making Lego. So let's make collaborating a positive and fun experience. One of the best ways to offer suggestions for someone to improve is to use the compliment sandwich. Sandwich your ideas for how they can change between two compliments. For example, wow dude, I love how you've designed the trees in your mock. They look fantastic. Personally, I think it might be a good idea to experiment a little bit more with the house that you've designed. The windows seem to kind of jet out a little bit. Maybe take a look at this and see how you could match that. But dude, the roof on the house is also brilliant. I really love what you've done there. Be sure to keep that. The possibly harsher words are sandwiched between two compliments. It lessens the blow and limits the possibility of offending anyone. And on the subject of offending people, don't take what people say personally. they're offering you help to improve. They only want what's best for the mock itself. If you take it personally, you risk losing the helpful gems of insight that they're offering you. So if you get offended, take a deep breath, step outside of yourself, and realize they're just trying to help you out. So ask yourself, in what they just told me, what parts are useful and can help me with my build? Another important thing to remember is to manage your time. If you're building towards a deadline, schedule your time. Start early and don't freak out. Starting with a few weeks to go before the convention you're displaying even begins is just going to stress you out. So don't do it. Give yourself plenty of time. Start early. Now, here are two very important things you need to straight up remove when you're collaborating. Ego and doubt. While you're building, remember there is no hierarchy. No one builder is better than the other. You're both on the same level, and you are both capable of creating amazing work together. Teamwork makes the dream work, as they say. So let go of your ego. Also, do not doubt yourself. If you're collaborating on a larger project, there will be many times that doubt enters your mind. Will I finish this on time? Can I actually do this? Am I even creative at all? Do not buy into these doubts. Because like Darth Maul said,
doubt will only lead to failure. Hold! Our combined strength will be rewarded.
Doubt will only lead to failure. Like the recovering alcoholic cannot allow the first drink, the artist cannot allow the first negative think. If you start to buy into any doubt-filled thoughts, let them go. None of them are true. Trust and believe that you've got this, and you will. Doubt that you can do it, and guess what? You won't accomplish it. You are stronger as a team. If you need help, fall back on your team. When you're both working on the same mock, it's important to make sure each builder's part of the diorama flows into the other person's. Now, how can you make both parts of your mock look like one awesome mock that seamlessly flows together? Well, here's some tips to make that possible. Decide on a color palette and make sure both sides share that same color palette. This way there's unity created between the mocks. If one side suddenly has a large concentration of a different color, it's going to stop things flowing into each other. You can also repeat specific textures and techniques. For example, if Eli uses this cobblestone technique on his side, it's only fitting that I use it too. Techniques are repeated and visual unity is created across the mock, which helps everything flow together naturally. Another important thing to do is to make sure you have a focal point on the mock. Most mocks tell a story. For example, this Hulk mock that I created is telling the simple story of Hulk smashing a petrol station and fighting a SWAT team. Obviously, Hulk is the major focal point on this diorama, and there are various visual cues on the mock to help make that a bit more obvious. His bright green color stands out against the rest of the mock's color scheme. The turret on the tank creates a line that draws your eye towards Hulk. The SWAT team are all running towards Hulk. That's drawing your eye towards him. The petrol station is busier on the opposite side, so your eye is naturally drawn to the larger gap that the Hulk is standing in. So see how various cues are drawing you towards the focal point? And as a result, things are easier to understand, and the story is just easier to follow. The work is kind of done for you. You don't have to spend hours trying to figure out what's going on. It's all there for you. If Hulk was off in the corner of the diorama, hidden behind things, the story would just be difficult to understand. So you have to make sure multiple elements are working in unison to help illustrate a clear story. Also, when Eli and I made our last collab, we made sure to have lots of invisible lines drawing you towards the demon, which again was the focal point on that mock. So like we see here with the street path, the eye line of the people, as well as the framing of the castle wall itself, we see that there are various different visual cues that draw your attention towards the demon, which is the focal point. And these different visual cues are placed across the entire diorama, so it helps tie everything together. It makes the mock flow, and it allows both sides to complement each other. Remember, you could also do something entirely different with your collaborative build. Like, for example, one person builds the vehicles, while the other person builds the landscape. You don't have to build two halves of the same diorama, like I keep talking about. The only reason I keep bringing that up is because that's what I have the most experience in. Instead, you could do something completely different. You could both build two large spaceships, or multiple floating islands with interconnecting bridges. Something fun, give it a try. There's lots of possibilities for collabs. So be sure to chat with your friends and consider what is your best option for your collaborative building styles. Remember too, with most collabs, you want it to look like one unified build, as if one person built the whole thing. Everything just flows together. And that's why I collaborate with Eli. We have very similar build styles. We use similar techniques. We both focus strongly on details. And we even think very similarly and build in very similar ways. So factor this in when you collaborate. Work with people who have similar build styles to you. If you work with someone who uses a lot of different colors in their builds, but you yourself find yourself using a very limited color palette, then you're way more likely to end up with a mock that looks like two different people made it. And like I said, in my opinion, the best collaborative builds are the ones where both styles perfectly complement each other, and it looks like one unified mock. But that being said, maybe you're doing a collab where you want to showcase everyone's different and unique building styles. And you know what? That's a brilliant idea. You could easily do that. I've seen a few RebelLUG collabs that basically do that exact thing, and those things always blow my mind. Be sure to check out those RebelLUG collabs. So both options are of course a possibility that you can consider. And both are great options you can pick from. So in the end, the basic rule of thumb is be respectful, be thoughtful, and plan ahead. Everyone can do that. So if you've got that in you, well then you're capable of collaborating. It's easy to work with your friends and collaborate on mocks. If you enjoyed this episode of Behind the Build, be sure to check out the next video that I will be posting, which goes into a little bit more detail about the creative build process that went into making our most recent collaborative build at Brickvention 2019, the Summoning of the Soul Hoarder. So if you want to learn a little bit more about that process and understand some of the other things that went into the collaborative process that I did with myself and Eli, there's a link in the description to that video, so be sure to check it out. Thanks guys, hope you enjoyed this episode of Behind the Build.